Welcome to Cinemophile, where we bring you the best in independent, documentary, and foreign films, and we talk to the people who made them. I'm your host, Mike Caspar, and you can find out more about the program by going to cinemophilepod.com. Before being the feminist powerhouse that she became known as, Nora Cortiñas was a traditional Argentinian housewife. She was catapulted into her country's political life when the military dictatorship kidnapped her son Gustavo and thousands of young activists. Shunned by the government and media, Nora took to the streets in 1997 with other mothers of the disappeared. Together, these brave women created Madres of Plaza de Mayo, the resistance movement that eventually led to the downfall of this violent military dictatorship and brought some measure of justice to the people of Argentina. Just a remarkable documentary film. It was co-directed by Jayson McNamara and Andrea Tortones. We're joined today by one of the producers, Sarah Schoellkopf. Sarah, welcome to Cinemophile.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
As we see so vividly in this film, the turmoil that was taking place, not only in South America, but also in Central America during this period of time, an awful lot of attempts on the part of the people in these countries to establish a democracy in the face of military dictatorships. Let's talk a little bit about the origin story for how this film came about. What inspired it?
Basically, I knew Nora for decades because I had had a study abroad college experience and internship with her organization, the Madres de la Plaza de Mayo. So I knew Nora since 1995. And because of that, I was very aware of all of the things she was doing in her life because she'd also become not only an academic. So I come from the higher ed space, I have my doctorate. And I had written many articles and interviews and part of my dissertation on Nora. So when she told me in 2018 that they were filming her, that a team, including Jayson McNamara, who's Australian, and two Argentines, were filming her, she was reticent to do this because the thing about Nora that I think you can see in the film, she's powerful and forceful and petite and fiery, but she's not a narcissist in any way. It's not about her, it's about the cause, it's about the people she's supporting. So for her to be this protagonist in a documentary seemed very odd. So she told me about this when we were doing a series of lectures in the southern part of the United States in the fall of 2018 that I'd helped facilitate bringing her to various universities. And I contacted Jayson and said, I'd love to support this film. They were already filming her. They'd been filming her for, I want to say, a year at that point. So we were in contact through emails, and they were doing fundraising. So I kind of said, hey, I'll send this around. I'll see what I can do. It was really 2020 lockdown, worldwide lockdown pandemic that I got on the phone with him for whatever reason for 4 hours.
Oh,
And
my.
that at that point, I was also looking to expand just teaching and said I'd love to be more involved in this. And so at that point, I shared some of the doctoral work I'd done, and we started collaborating, and I started seeing edits, and it just kind of grew over time to the point that I made a total career pivot, created my shingle DoctoraStories, and this is the first really big movie that I'm producing. So I'm very excited. Nora was incredibly important to me. The team is insanely talented, and it's just been a wonderful journey, honestly.
Yeah, no, I can see that in the film, just how dynamic she is and her
Yeah.
ability to pull people in to what she was doing, her determination. We can get into that in terms of just how focused she was. It all comes back to her love of her family, but in particular her son Gustavo, who disappeared. But let's take a step back and look at the political culture, what was happening in Argentina and what caused this military dictatorship. Why did that come into control of Argentina? Let's talk a little bit about that backstory if we can.
Okay, so you have to understand that the United States had a hand in this whole Plan Condor, which had its wings, if you're thinking about a condor, in many different Southern Cone and Latin American nations, specifically Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, and Brazil. Impetus was to eradicate, I mean, it was the Nixon era that he wanted to eradicate communism all over the globe. It started in Chile. Chile had a very 1973, 72. I can't remember the exact date. I didn't do my Chilean history before this interview, but 72, 73, Pinochet topples the democratically elected Social Democrat, Salvador Allende, and other areas in the region realized they could not have that spectacle like coup. They wanted it to be quiet, but the impetus was the same, to eradicate and suppress voices that politically might have been different, that might have brought up issues of labor rights, that may have been teaching quote unquote Marxism. We see a lot of parallels,
Yes,
sadly,
we
with
do.
our country today.
Yeah.
So it was 1976. As one of the protagonists in the movie says, there'd been many coups in Argentine past. What would happen is, the society would get kind of liberal, let's just say, and then the military would come in, right the ship, if you will, and then another democratic, a few years later, they'd pass over the reins. Well, this particular dictatorship had a malice and a terrorist impulse that was very different from the other coups. And with the support of the United States in some ways, previous to Jimmy Carter, they took over. They followed the playbook of the Nazis and Mussolini. They did the night and fog idea, where people were disappeared off the street in front of bystanders or sometimes in the cover of night, non-marked cars. This is ringing bells all over the
Yeah.
place in terms of today. Masked people, not uniformed officers, military and police, would kidnap people, throw them in trunks of cars, and they would be taken to illegal concentration camp detention centers. The purpose was to not only instill terror in the population so people would not speak out, people would not protest, and people would not react, but also to eradicate an entire young generation. But, the military in Argentina targeted everyone. Jews were targeted, laborers were targeted, military. Actually, there are disappeared military. There are foreigners who were disappeared. Children were disappeared. It was really this insidious system to terrorize the population into submission and allow the dictators, because it was a junta. That was also different about Argentina. It was, they had a head, but it was the entire military had leadership in that system.
And this is an era when, as you described it, and I think it's worth pointing out, reiterating, and that is that the United States considered South America essentially within their power of influence. Yeah, there's a lot of blood on our hands, but at the same time, thank God for Nora, thank God for
Yeah.
Norita, and because her son Gustavo disappeared, as we were talking about earlier, and many, many, many others. And I think one of the great strengths of the film is to give us this context that we're talking about here, but also to be able to personalize the story and sort of the domino effect it had on her life, despite all of it, and her determination to keep moving forward is just amazing. Amazing to watch, amazing to hear about. And so I want to, as much as we could get into the geopolitics of all of this, which I'm more than happy to do, but I also think the humanity and the other people that we see in the film who are part of this conversation is pretty darn remarkable.
Thank you. It's true. I mean, and we did some iterations. There was a screening we did November of 2023. We did it with, thought makers, film people, Argentines, and my husband was actually there. And it's funny because Jason calls my husband the everyman. Like, so when my husband, because he saw many different iterations of this film over the 6 years that I was involved or more. And he, after the screening, he was like, I still don't get this. And I think we realized we were bogged down in the intricacies of Argentine history. And you don't really need all of that. You can kind of allude to it to get to the meat of the heart of the story, which is Nora's story. And then by extension, the other activists, female activists, and people, talking heads in the movie, because you could talk about, I mean, I wrote a 300-page dissertation about this. You could write so many things, but in a movie, you really have to think about the narrative structure and the arc and captivate the viewer quickly. Because if this is on an international platform and not just in Argentina or Latin America, and that's the idea behind it, we want this story to be projected all over the world because it is really a strong protagonist who gives us hope and inspiration at this time. There's so many nuances one could talk about with the dictatorship specifically, or very sinister characters, but we don't need any of that. We just need to understand that there's this huge antagonist being Videla and the military, and Nora and her collective female movement of mothers.
One of the people that we meet in the film is Ana Maria Cariaga, who is an amazing extension of Nora's story in her own
Exactly.
way. I just that because Nora's compelling, no doubt. I could watch her for, all day. Bringing in these other elements, bringing in the other people who were affected by the junta, it broadens it out. So let's talk about her because I thought she was amazing too. So.
Ana Maria Cariaga,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
so the thing about her story, her family story is so incredible too. Her mother was Paraguayan. She fled the Stroessner regime, moved to Argentina, got married, created a family, was a working mother. She actually, this came up once Pope Francis was made Pope. She was his boss at a fabrica, at a medical factory. There's a Netflix series that talks about this. So he knew Ana Maria Cariaga's mother because she had been his boss. So Ana Maria is disappeared, pregnant, but that's the reveal later in the film, of course. And her mother becomes one of the madres, knew Nora. They would go to the plaza together. Nora very much respected Esther. I'm forgetting her maiden name, but Cariaga is how she would go with. That's how the madres identified themselves. They would take the husband's name because that's usually what the children's last name was. So you have multiple names in Latin America. And then Ana Maria Cariaga was released from prison to be immediately sent to as a refugee to Sweden as an exile because it was so dangerous. Her mother was one of the three mothers that was disappeared mere weeks later by the military dictatorship. And so, Ana Maria has suffered not only personally greatly to her own body, but her mother was disappeared. So it's like you're getting these mirrored stories. Ana Maria Cariaga sort of represents what Gustavo probably lived in these torture chambers. And then she is being reflected back to the mother who looked for her and then was disappeared. So it's this really amazing duality of relationships.
As you were talking about earlier, what's going to pull people into this story is just exactly what you just described, is how powerful. And God, I remember, again, I was a young man when this was going on, and I just remember seeing those madres of Plaza del Mayo walking around If they could have been in Russia, they would have been babushkas. They would have been. You see
Totally.
these women, no harm, no threat to anyone. They're simply asking for some answers to the people
Totally.
they love, that they care about, and willing
It,
to do anything that they have to do to make that happen. Faced with with overwhelming force as well behind the
oh,
threat.
yes. And you see it in the movie, some of the stills or some of the archive
Yeah,
videography or film is just amazing. Like they were just attempting to go into the plaza, and the military is there with batons, like smashing into them and with horses. I mean, it's
yeah,
brutal. And
yeah.
and they were completely nonviolent. They focused on absolute nonviolence. That was one of their most ethical feathers, if you will, in their cap, because they were not espousing violence. They were saying, all we want are answers. We're going to circle every Thursday at 3:30. And of course, they became more organized and they became an official, not NGO and all these things. But like the beginning was just, where are our children? What is happening? Why do we have no information? We have no knowledge of their whereabouts. Somebody give us an answer.
There is so much to be said for the force of a moral argument in the face of violent behavior. Women, the embodiment of that, how anyone, it was so powerful. I'm not, because I'm gonna run out of ways to say it, but the fact that they did, and you're right. At one point, they started disappearing, and I mean, I don't know what I would have done if I had been amongst them. I don't know if I would have been able to muster that level of bravery, of courage to continue knowing that I was now the target. I don't know.
Well, Nora talks about that. That's one of my favorite moments in the film. They're disappeared. We have this incredible animation sequences. People always ask me about the animation, and Andrea Tortones is the art director and co-director. And we added more animation because we can convey these really tragic, powerful moments without reenactment, which can sometimes seem, I don't know, they don't seem as powerful in a documentary like this. So we have these animations, and then afterwards, she says, going back to the plaza was such an important moment because we all had to do it together. And it was this real collective moment. And Ana Maria Cariaga's mother, Esther, went back to the plaza even though her daughter had been reappeared. And all the madres say, well, why are you here? She's like, I'm going to be here until we get them all back. Like this is my cause. And that idea of solidarity and
Mhm.
collective action is just also so powerful right now.
Even the most powerful will fall in the face of that level of moral argument, moral certainty. I mean, Nelson Mandela did it. There's many examples, and this is certainly one of them. I just want to quickly remind our listeners that we're speaking with Sarah Schoellkopf, and she is one of the producers of the film Norita. The co-directors are Jayson McNamara and Andrea Tortones. And the story of Nora Cortiñas is powerful, uplifting, restores your faith. If you needed it to be restored in humanity, certainly Nora will help you in that cause. It's a great film. It really is. And
Thank you.
one last thing. I really think that if you're going to go see Norita, the film really picks up the momentum of the film, picks up a lot of emotional heft as it moves along. By the time you get to the end, you are really all in on everyone's story, and as you reflect on their own journeys to get to the point where we see them at the end of the film, it is very powerful. It's a very powerful experience. And
Thank you.
congratulations to you as one of the producers of the film, and to Jason and to Andrea for their work here. So again, Norita. So be looking for it. You can go to noritafilm.com, Norita film.com, to find out more about it and how you can watch it. Thank you so very much, Sarah. You have been listening to Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar, the place where you will hear from the best in independent documentary and foreign filmmakers. Please check out our previous interviews as well as upcoming interviews and special programming by going to cinemaphilepod.com. We are also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, searchable under Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar. Until next time, thank you for listening.